People in Southern California have a reputation for being laid back, super cool. Nothing's gonna bother them. Not even the burial of high-level nuclear waste on a pristine public beach only 100 feet from the ocean? Maybe that was once the case, but then you hear a surfing legend address a crowd and urge them to get involved in fighting back against this nuclear waste burial because
if we don't fight back, our kids die. Our homes are worthless, and everywhere from San Diego to Los Angeles is wiped out. This is a nuclear wasteland. Every one of those canisters is a Chernobyl accident waiting to happen, and there are 150 of them.
Well, when you hear the difficult truth spelled out in such a stark and undeniable manner, even if you are a laid-back Southern California dude or dudette, you finally get that even you are in that seat that we all share.
Nuclear hot seat, what are those people thinking? Nuclear hot seat, what have those boys been drinking? Nuclear hot seat, the corium is sinking. Our time to act is shrinking, but our activists are linking. Nuclear hot seat, it's the bomb.
Welcome to Nuclear Hot Seat, the weekly international news magazine keeping you up to date on all things nuclear from a different perspective. My name is Libby Halevi. I'm the producer and host, as well as a survivor of the nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island from just 1 mile away. So I know what can happen when those nuclear so-called experts get it wrong. This week, we drop in on Songs for Songs, a big rally that happened last week at the Belly Up, a famous music club in San Clemente, California. We will hear from surfing legend Ian Cairns, Kathy Iwane, who post-Fukushima relocated from her home in Japan with her family, filmmaker Adam Salkin, Native American activist Leona Morgan, along with information shared by a former head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and a retired naval rear admiral. Plus, there will be an exclusive interview with San Onofre Safety's Donna Gilmore on the latest important oops revelation from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that they really would rather we not know. We will also have nuclear news from around the world, numbnuts of the week for outstanding nuclear boneheadedness, and more honest nuclear information than can be found in the entire Be Best program. All of it coming up in just a few moments. Today is Tuesday, October 16, 2018, and here is the week's nuclear news from a different perspective. Here in the U.S., a Department of Energy plan to bail out closing coal and nuclear plants is stuck at the White House after backers failed to convince key administration officials to approve it. The plan is on hold due to skepticism from members of the National Economic Council and National Security Council. Watchdog groups from across the nuclear weapons complex are pushing back against a new Department of Energy order that severely constrains the oversight capacity of the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board, which serves as a critical guard against Department of Energy and National Nuclear Security Administration efforts to cut corners on safety. It provides safety oversight at the nation's nuclear weapons labs, including Los Alamos National Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratories, and the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico. New Mexico Senators Tom Udall and Mark Heinrich secured measures in the 2019 fiscal year Energy and Water Development Appropriations Bill, expected to be approved by Congress soon, to protect the DNFSB and protect its right to talk to contract employees, the people closest to the work, without getting authorization from managers and DOE. In Texas, the state is still at risk from deadly high-level radioactive waste from nuclear reactors around the country, which could travel through our major cities by rail, close to homes, schools, and businesses, and be dumped on Texas for decades to come. Waste Control Specialist seeks to store 40,000 tons of high-level radioactive waste in Andrews, Texas. and rail transport through major transportation centers, thousands of shipments over the next 20 years, each rail car would carry as much plutonium as was in the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Comment period to the NRC has just been extended to November 19, and we'll have a link up to where you can find a letter to model your own response on, or to just send as is. It will be on the website, nuclearhotseat.com, under episode 383. Regarding Japan, Nancy Faust and simplyinfo.org have published an article about the insoluble microparticles from damaged reactors, bits of fuel and other materials from the reactor meltdowns at Fukushima Daiichi that have been found around Japan since soon after the disaster. Citizens with handheld radiation meters first discovered them as highly radioactive fine black sands on the roadsides and gutters. Researchers determined they are tiny fused particles of vaporized reactor fuel, meltdown byproducts, structural components of the reactors, and sometimes concrete from the reactor containments. The small size of these microparticles makes them an inhalation risk. And they have been found near Fukushima Daiichi, in the evacuation zone, outside the evacuation zone, and as far away as Tokyo. We will link to this article on our website. Still thinking of going to the Olympics? And now,
Nuclear hot seat, nuclear hot seat, nuclear hot seat, numbnuts of the week.
In Fukushima Prefecture, a 42-year-old man has resumed operations at his dairy farm as of September 13, with the arrival of 8 cows at his barn. This after an evacuation order for the 2011 nuclear crisis was lifted in most parts of the village here. That's the image of normalization in Fukushima that the government is promoting in advance of the 2020 Tokyo Radioactive Olympics. Tetsuji Sakuma plans to ship milk for public sale as of the beginning of 2019. He says he will check the level of radiation in the cow's milk once a week. But how is he going to test? Is there going to be a gamma spectrometer used to analyze the milk, which is the piece of machinery that's needed and costs over $10,000? And who or what is supervising? Released radiation and particles land on the ground. It gets into the grass. The cows eat the grass. It gets into the milk. So don't consume milk or any other dairy product that claims to be from Fukushima. Because if so, not only Tatsuji Sakuma and the officials who have allowed this, but you will also be
Nuclear hot seat, numbnuts of the week.
Internationally, France is being sued for crimes against humanity over their nuclear tests in the South Pacific. They're being brought to International Criminal Court for conducting 193 nuclear weapons tests on the atolls of Mururoa and Fangataufa between 1960 and 1996. Regarding the International Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, on September 26th, 7 more countries signed and 4 more countries ratified the treaty. There are now 67 countries that have signed the agreement and 19 states which are party to the treaty, meaning they have ratified it. When 50 countries ratify, it's law. And in Ukraine, as of Friday, October 5th, the Chernobyl site of a catastrophic nuclear meltdown in 1986 has been opened as a solar power park. Talk about your classic case of turning lemons into lemonade. We'll have this week's special feature on San Onofre in just a moment. But first, nuclear just keeps getting scarier. The more you know, the scarier it gets. And it's almost Halloween, so that means our stories should be getting out into the world, right? Except the fact that usually they don't speaks to the ongoing need for nuclear hot seat, so that you've got at least one source every week where you can learn the latest nuclear outrages, along with the sagas of brave activists on a bake sale budget fighting against the multi-gazillion-dollar nuclear industry. It's David and Goliath for sure. Remember, David won. But this is being played out in real time, and we don't have the end of the story yet. So where else can you go to get a 1-hour update that covers news, interviews, actions to take, and even humor whenever possible? So, help us keep going. Because while most things nuclear are scary, What's really scary over here is that if we don't have the funds to keep going, we can't keep going. And you won't be able to get these weekly nuclear hot seat updates. So let's not let that happen, shall we? Don't think, wow, that's a great idea. I should donate sometime. Please, do it right now. Hit the pause button and send a donation of any size by going to nuclearhotseat.com and clicking on the big red donate button. And for those of you who want to make a big difference on a little budget, help us out a little at the time, because on the website there's a big green donate button that allows you to quickly set up a recurring donation of just $5 a month. The same as a cup of coffee, maybe a little bit on the side. So please, do what you can to help Nuclear Hot Seat search out and share the nuclear information that helps you understand that the nuclear industry would rather you not understand. Whatever you can do to help, you have my gratitude. Here's this week's special feature on San Onofre. On Monday, October 8th, a rally called Songs for Songs was held at the famous Belly Up music venue in San Clemente. Now, Songs refers to the San Onofre nuclear generating station. Songs, get it? I've always hated that acronym because it made it sound as if, in protesting that nuclear reactor, we were against music. But this time, the name fit. Musicians joined up with activists, surfers, representatives on a range of nuclear issues, and a terrific MC, Chris Coate, to present solid nuclear information buffered by great music and a real rock and roll vibe. The evening kicked off with a videotaped welcome by Gregory Yasko, former chair of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the good guy, the one who stood up for reactor safety after Fukushima, and was virtually blackballed by the nuclear industry as a result. Now, Dr. Yasko is one of two people whose audios I've been asked not to use on this program, but I can cite what he said about his thoughts on the right way to approach dealing with the high-level radioactive nuclear waste at San Onofre. Former NRC Chair Yasko said, "You cannot come to a reasonable solution about storage of nuclear waste without the full support and engagement of the community near where that waste will be stored." He encouraged those present to speak of what they learned that night when they talk with others in the community before explaining, all we need to do is stop what is happening, the base being Camp Pendleton. The base is a much better place to store the fuel than the location that Southern California Edison is currently planning, and I think it is reasonable to say that they should stop what they are doing there and simply move to the base side. Those were the words of former Nuclear Regulatory Commission Chair Gregory Yasko. Then, after a break for music, we heard from a surfing legend. Ian Cairns is a former champion surfer who was also influential in establishing the World Professional Surfing Circuit, and particularly the World Championship Tour. A professional surfer and surf contest organizer and promoter originally from Perth, Western Australia, Ian has lived in California for 27 years and has family in Laguna Beach. For him, the issue is personal.
It's been a real novelty for me because in Western Australia there are no nuclear power stations, so I saw the two boobs down there on the beach at San Onofre, and I thought it was kind of cool and funny. And then I heard about it getting closed down, and thank you very much to Torgen and Gary Hedrick because they worked to close it down. And one day I was looking at some Surfrider posts on Facebook, and they were talking about the water rise because of global warming. And then I said, well, if the water is rising like 50 feet or something, wouldn't that impact the storage of nuclear waste down at San Onofre Nuclear Power Station? And they just went, oh, it's complicated. And I thought to myself, well, it's not complicated to me, because nuclear waste being stored when it gets flooded by the water rise is kind of probably going to be bad. And I realised then that Surfrider was not on this issue. And I realised at that point that someone had to stand up in the surfing community and say, hashtag no nukes at SanO. To me, it's very, very simple. Each of those canisters, out of 150 canisters that they're loading into the concrete down there 100 foot from the ocean in substandard canisters, 5/8 of an inch thick, when in Europe and in Japan they store it in 10 to 19 inch thick canisters, Edison is cheating us. And we need to fight back and tell them no. Because if we don't fight back, our kids die. Our homes are worthless, and everywhere from San Diego to Los Angeles is wiped out. This is a nuclear wasteland. Every one of those canisters is a Chernobyl accident waiting to happen, and there are 150 of them. So we need, as surfers, to get our together and stand up and create a community voice all over the Southland here to stop this nuclear waste storage. First and foremost, stop putting it into substandard canisters. Buy the real canisters from Europe or Japan or wherever they can, because you know who's paying for this? It's on our electrical bill. So I say, if I'm paying for it, buy a Rolls-Royce canister, not a Kia. That's what we need to do. So firstly, take it out of that wet storage and put it into the proper canisters. And then I say, let's move it over the freeway 100, 200 yards from the ocean. So when the ocean rises, it's not going to get drowned. And at that moment, we have done our thing. The thing that we can probably achieve is to get this put in the correct canister and get it moved over the road. And let the politicians figure out where it's going to go next. That's something that I realize that we as a group can probably achieve. So I say that we link arms and make that happen. No nukes at SanO.
That was surfing champion and legend Ian Cairns. So what does it mean when nuclear reactors melt down and you're forced to choose between your country and your genetic future? Kathy Iwani gave this harrowing account of living in Japan with her husband and 2 children when Fukushima happened, and how she witnessed that event play out in her personal life and in the world around her.
After the meltdowns of March 11, 2011, we made a really difficult decision to leave Japan, separate our family. Husband remained in Japan, and we decided it was the best thing for our 2 girls to come and continue their lives and their education in California. California is my birthplace, but my husband has been a lifetime surfer, as is my youngest daughter. So this issue is really, really close to my heart. So I'm grateful to be here tonight to share a bit about why it is imperative that the people of Southern California do everything in our power to avoid a nuclear accident at the shuttered San Onofre nuclear waste station, where highly radioactive nuclear waste is currently being stored on the beach. This is because I witnessed firsthand the unfolding of the Japanese government cover-ups, which is eerily familiar with what's been going on with Southern Cal Edison, and aside from Gregory Jasko, what's really going on with the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There are cover-ups galore, and it's time that we wake up and smell the coffee and really understand that we hold the power. On March 11, 2011, I watched the Japanese government fumble through live television updates regarding the tsunami and the resultant triple nuclear meltdowns. At the same time, the U.S. State Department was strongly recommending that U.S. nationals evacuate as soon as possible from Tokyo, which is only 150 miles away from the nuclear reactors. Sadly, a lot of my Japanese colleagues and friends were completely in the dark about this, so I immediately got online, shared it with some friends, and people were honestly aghast. They had no idea that the State Department was telling U.S. nationals to leave ASAP. The government's overriding message was that there was no immediate health threat and that we should all just not panic. No problem. Everything's under control. In fact, it would take longer than a full month for the authorities to admit that one nuclear meltdown had ensued, let alone 3. Soon after the nuclear accident, the Japanese House of Parliament had an emergency session to arbitrarily declare the safety in radioactive foods. They raised the amount of acceptable, ingestible radioactivity in foods. Is that an oxymoron to you? That's strange to me. This wasn't based on science. It was just something that they did so that the people would not panic. To put it in perspective, they raised it to 100 becquerels per kilogram of food. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but what that means is 100 nuclear disintegrations per second. What that means is that when you eat this food, it is disintegrating in your body. It's not good for little babies. It's not good for pregnant women. It's not good for anybody. To put this more into perspective, before the government arbitrarily changed this law, they mandated it, no one voted on it, nuclear waste was deemed to be nuclear waste if it was the same measurement, 100 becquerels per kilogram. And so suddenly, we're all walking around with a question mark in our minds going, wait a minute, now this stuff is safe to eat? It was pure insanity. So I'm just sort of letting you know that contamination is a real thing, no matter how diluted it is. And this is a risk that we have to be very well aware of. As a matter of course, we purchased a Geiger counter and we noticed that foods that were in the main Japanese markets, like your non-organic, non-local foods, leafy greens, milk, and fish from the northeast area close to Fukushima, were registering with the red needle very, very high in terms of its contamination. This was the beginning of the end for us in Japan. I had 2 young girls. It was time to make some decisions. So as an English teacher and a curriculum developer at my daughter's elementary school in Japan for 10 years, I was really shocked when the principal said, hey, we really don't want you talking out loud at the PTA regarding your research on the ingredients in our school lunches. I had done some research, and about 60% of what was being served in our school lunches had come from areas not inside Fukushima. Some of them were, but too close for comfort. And so when I shared this with the principal, we had a great working relationship. I assumed he would perhaps act on my suggestion. Hey, we're 380 miles away from these reactors. Why don't we get funding for scintillators so that we can calm down parents' fears about at least we can test the lunches in our school lunch program. I was immediately labeled an alarmist, and he said, look, you're going to freak everyone out. Don't say anything. And so I thought, okay, that's kind of bizarre. So understandably, I took that information. I said, hey, I pulled my child out from the school lunch program, and I started making her a homemade lunch every day. And it was kind of the final straw. The last straw was when her homeroom teacher said to me, we really don't want Alyssa to discuss with her peers why she's bringing a lunch. So we've told her to tell her friends that she has an allergy, a food allergy. And I was just like, oh my God, it felt like I was kicked in the stomach because I had a great working relationship with the staff, worked there for 10 years, what have you. And so that was basically when things start unraveling, and it got to be pretty intense. About this time, I began to meet and network with other mothers who had evacuated their children to our city of Wakayama, some 300 miles southwest of Fukushima, whose children began to have mysterious illnesses, bloody noses, bruising, skin rashes, lethargy, in areas that were even closer outside of Fukushima, for example, Tokyo. Meanwhile, many of their husbands remained at home to continue working to support them or to continue to pay mortgages on their now radioactive homes, which to me is just insane. So it's not a coincidence that the word Fukushima Rikon is a normal term now in the Japanese vocabulary. And what that means is Fukushima divorce. Because of the stress involved in separating families, it hasn't been easy to be away from my husband. Thank God he has the means to come and go. And thank God, I just spent a month with him seeing our daughter off to college. So now I'm back on the bandwagon and I get to spend more time fighting this. Fast forward to the closure of San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station and the burial of 3.6 million pounds of highly radioactive waste in an area where 8 million inhabitants would need to be evacuated in the event of a terrorist attack or a natural disaster. Just a stone's throw from Highway 5, in second-rate casks, which are nowhere near as strongly built as those canisters used to house nuclear waste in Fukushima. It's important to note that throughout the terrible damage at Fukushima, the casks they use for our dry cask waste storage in Fukushima, it is unscathed, it is safe and unharmed. So it's important that we get, as Ian mentioned, we need to get the best casks. We're paying for it. Why not get the best? Why would both Southern California Edison and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission authorize the use of second-rate casks without a way to monitor leaks? Clearly, it's a question of money. Why bury this waste in a seismically active area where two faults converge? It's worth noting that the reason we had a tsunami, it started out with an earthquake. That was the epicenter of this earthquake, was just off the coast of Fukushima. Had the earthquake, huge tsunami, and then the failure of the reactors in Fukushima. So it's all very, very easy to understand why we need to please a call to action. This is the call to action. Let's learn and apply the lessons of Fukushima. Send an email, call your elected officials demanding relocation of this waste across where Camp Pendleton is. Call for discussion of this waste at town halls. Go to San Onofre safety.org to study the details of what we're risking here. And finally, show up at the polls and vote.
That was former Japan resident and current San Diego resident Kathy Iwane. When the nuclear industry touts its energy as being carbon-free and good for climate change, they are not taking into account the real carbon footprint of nuclear energy. All the dirty energy used and ferociously dirty radioactive waste produced at every step of their supply chain. From uranium mining and tailings left behind, transport, processing, building and maintaining nuclear reactors and fuel pools, decommissioning, and management of the resulting high-level radioactive waste for, at minimum, 2 millennia. Not exactly carbon-free, let alone green. And there's another aspect to the issue. That's that the weight of dealing with nuclear contamination and waste falls disproportionately on the poor, on minorities, and especially on indigenous people. Leona Morgan is of the Donna people, known to we Westerners as the Navajo tribal people, and she wears many hats in the fight against nuclear. She's a member of the Nuclear Issues Study Group, Hall No, and Dene No Nukes. And she traveled from her home in New Mexico to address the crowd at Songs for Songs and let them know that nuclear is not just a local issue on the beach at San Onofre. The problems are legion, national, international, and global. Leona Morgan.
I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I work on issues related to what we call nuclear colonialism. So in New Mexico, we have everything. We have uranium mining. We were the place where they finished the Manhattan Project and tested the first nuclear weapon on July 16th, 1945. On that same day, July 16th, 1979, was the world's largest uranium tailings spill in a community very close to where my family is from. And this was only 3 months after 3 Mile Island, yet nobody knows about it. Nobody's ever heard about the Church Rock disaster of 1979. And next year will be the 40th anniversary with little to no cleanup, no studies, and really not even any awareness from our neighbors and people like you all. We call this environmental racism. Yeah. No, boo! Yeah. So they say today is Indigenous Peoples Day, but for myself, my relatives, and everyone on Turtle Island, every day is Indigenous Peoples Day. We are still here. We are still working and protecting our homelands. We still use our sacred places. We're still practicing our traditional ways, and a lot of us are still living on our ancestral homelands. And so what I do is work to protect those ancestral homelands and sacred places. Right now, there are 2 proposals to build what's called Consolidated Interim Storage Facilities, or CIS for short. So Yucca Mountain was supposed to be a permanent repository, but now what we're dealing with are temporary Band-Aid solutions because the federal government has continuously hit snooze on their Nuclear Waste Policy Act. They don't know what to do with the nuclear waste. And to be honest, a lot of us, I would call myself an anti-nuclear activist. A lot of our communities don't know what to do with the waste. And we need to have some serious conversations with people like you. I just came from New England. I was visiting communities around reactors that have recently shut down. Yankee Row, Vermont Yankee, and Oyster Creek are all nuclear reactors that have shut down, and they all have waste that needs to be moved or stored safely where they're at. And so in our communities in New Mexico, all we know is we don't want the waste in our state. There's 2 proposals, like I said, and they're 40 miles apart. But the thing is, we're not saying this because we're a bunch of NIMBYs. We don't think anyone should have nuclear waste in their state. So we need to stop making it. So in order to work together, we need to figure out what to do with this stuff. And it's going to take a long time. And I'd rather have these conversations with people like you who care about your beaches and your waters and your families than to rely on the DOE or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And so something I wanted to mention is that these CIS facilities, they're not even legal. So the federal government is trying to propose to bring all of the nation's high-level radioactive waste to the Southwest. This is over 80,000 tons of the most radioactive junk that's been created by the nuclear fuel chain. And so what that means is transportation across the entire country by rails. So it's not just our backyard, it's not just your backyard, it's everyone's backyard. What you can do to help to stop this, right now there's a bill in Congress, a House bill, HR 3053. So what the federal government is trying to do is to allow these CIS facilities to be built when they're not even legal. And what they're saying is that New Mexico wants it. New Mexico wants this waste. And so everyone in Congress, they're just trying to figure out what to do with a problem that was created a long time ago. And so what we need you all to do is to call your senators to say no to HR 3053. So it already went through the House already passed it. The bill has not been introduced in the Senate yet, and we're expecting it to come up during the lame duck session. So I just wanted to share this message with you all. In New Mexico, we're dealing with everything from uranium mining to nuclear weapons facilities, and now these nuclear waste dumps. So let's work together to stop this and say no nukes, no more nuclear waste.
That was anti-nuclear activist Leona Morgan. Filmmaker Adam Salkin gave a powerful presentation based not only on what he has learned about nuclear in the process of shooting his latest film, but because it's an important part of his personal history.
My name is Adam Salkin. I'm a filmmaker and musician who grew up in the shadows of a contaminated nuclear site on the border of Los Angeles called the Santa Susana Field Lab. My family and I had no idea that this site existed when we moved into the area, not until after the fact. That fact being that the first major accident happened there in 1959, followed by scores of other accidents over the next 3 to 4 decades, leaving an enormous amount of contamination behind, as well as a community that's still feeling the effects to this day. And we're here tonight to make sure that that doesn't happen at San Onofre, an accident that can never be taken back. But before I move on to discuss San Onofre, I at least need to touch on the battle going on next to the nuclear facility where I grew up. Now, I don't have time to go into the history of that site right now, but you can go to ssflpanel.org or parentsagainstssfl.com to learn more. And if you want to help us out just a little bit, you can go to change.org, type Santa Susana Field Lab into the search engine and sign a couple petitions for us. One that will help us get a full cleanup of the site, and another that will help us protect the community, specifically help us deal with the groundwater situation there. So with the Santa Susana Field Lab being the poster child for what we don't want to have happen here, it's important that we continue to build an army of people who understand the critical issues and can push the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to help stand strong and protect us, to make sure that the changes are made that we need to see happen there. Because with nuclear power, there is no room for mechanical failure or human error, and we must be prepared for a natural disaster or terrorist attack. The risks of unpreparedness, of losing our homes, families, and jobs is just too great. And the sad truth is that San Onofre is not prepared. And this isn't me saying this. This is coming from top scientists that I've interviewed over the years, as well as those who work on the inside. And as for mechanical failure and human error, we've seen both at San Onofre, because safety has not been their priority. For example, right now, as you've heard, the radioactive waste there, the spent fuel containing the most dangerous man-made poisons that have ever existed, are not being placed into the safest casks, the thickest casks that can be monitored at a location that is the most secure. They are not using the best science has to offer, but instead the cheaper, thinner, unmonitorable canisters that are vulnerable to cracking within 17 years, while the radioactive waste inside is going to be dangerous for hundreds of thousands of years to come. And this decision could be the human error that leads to the end of our country as we know it. It's the same type of human error that led to the $650 million faulty steam generators being installed there, which then had a bad design, led to a mechanical failure, and a radioactive leak. Do we need to wait for the next earthquake, tsunami, terrorist attack, or canister to drop 18 feet to the ground to show how easy it is for the worst case scenario to play out? Or are we going to come together and force the changes that must be made to protect our community today? And one of those changes that has to be made is our reliance on the corporation, on Southern California Edison, to tell us when there's a radioactive leak, to tell us when there's an accident. That must stop now. No more self-monitoring by the corporation. We need real-time data provided by a trustworthy, independent source. It's the least we deserve. After all, they're releasing this radiation onto all of us, and as a matter of fact, into us. Which brings me to my last point. There is no safe level of radiation exposure. The linear no threshold model, accepted by the National Academy of Sciences, shows that all the way down to zero, at the lowest levels, radiation is still harmful. And although we're here tonight to prevent high levels of radiation from being released, it's important to understand all the risks before the accident, not after. Because I've walked in the Fukushima prefecture after those meltdowns. I've seen, spoken, and commiserated with families living in high levels of radiation as if it's normal, because that's where their homes, jobs, families, and friends are. They wish, this is what they told me, they wish that they were more aware, understood, and fought the Fukushima fight before the worst case scenario happened to them. And that's the opportunity we have here tonight, to fight and become aware before the worst case scenario happens to all of us. So tonight, we're here to prevent that worst case scenario from happening to all of us, to prevent a disaster, a mechanical failure or human error that causes our own man-made, completely foreseeable, absolutely preventable, categorically harmful, unquestionably criminal, and disgustingly obvious disaster that is heading our way.
Filmmaker Adam Salkin. His long-awaited film on nuclear issues is nearing completion. And when it's ready for release, he has promised Nuclear Hot Seat an extended interview. I've seen clips, specifically a segment on the Indian Point reactors in New York, and it is jaw-droppingly good. Finally, from Songs for Songs, it's rare that a retired naval rear admiral finds himself at a rally, But that's where Admiral Len Herring was, speaking to the crowd at Songs for Songs. I have been asked not to use his audio on Nuclear Hot Seat, but his words are public record, so here is a portion of his speech. He said, "I must admit, I never in my life ever thought that I'd find myself at a rally. But there's a point in life where you've got to say, you've just got to do what's right. And speaking against what's happening at San Onofre is right. I'm not a nuclear engineer. In the 70s and 80s, I was a nuclear weapons security officer, nuclear weapons handling officer, nuclear weapons safety officer. I understood what it took to safely maneuver and move material, nuclear material, of a much smaller quantity than we're dealing with at San Onofre, properly, with the safeguards, conditions, and procedures. And the more I learned about what was going on at San Onofre, the more I became scared. Sidebar. Imagine that. San Onofre scares a rear admiral. Back to his speech. I started to question whether or not they knew what they were doing, and more importantly, whether there were procedures and certifications in place and the individuals actually responsible for moving 2.6 million pounds of material were the right people to do what they were doing. And we weren't getting answers. We were getting questions. You explain to me. I'm sorry, folks. That's not how it works. They're supposed to make us feel comfortable with their answers, not spin around the bush and come right back to the place where we started. But they're supposed to provide us with an assurity, with individuals who are certainly qualified beyond those individuals who have an ultimate responsibility to us all for the safety of this material. I spent my entire career assessing risk. I spent my entire career looking for the consequences and determining whether or not it's safe to do what you're doing for both the sake of individuals and security, which I'm responsible for imposing. And when the risk conditions outweigh the others, you sat back and you say, you know what? This is probably something we should examine in a completely different fashion. He spoke about being a member of the advisory board to the Center for Climate and Security, and the fact that there are countries around the world that expect that a large portion of their renewable energy will be provided by nuclear. Returning to quotes, he said, "Those 92 countries are going to engage in a technology that America has, and look what we're doing with our waste. That's the thing that scares me the most, as we are supposed to be the most technologically advanced nuclear-capable country in the world that not only regulates but understands the consequences of the risks, and we are today allowing the burial on a beach of 3 million pounds. And as the former director of the NRC said, once it's in the ground, folks, it's there forever. He's basically declared that there's no way anybody's going to come back and take it out. But more recently, we've even heard that it may not even be safe to move the canisters once they're in the ground, which means they're there forever. Now what do we do? Well, it's time to say, you know what? Hold on. We cannot allow this to happen without assurances that what they are doing is safe, and not safe in a questionable fashion, because every time you ask them, they say, well, theoretically it could be done. You don't screw with theoretical nuclear catastrophes. You either know how to do it or you don't know how to do it. It's that simple. It either has been done or it has not been done. And if it has not been done, then it needs to be engineered to a point in which we are absolutely assured, 100%, that the safety of the material will not jeopardize or potentially destroy Southern California or any place else that they leave there. We need to fix this now. This is not business as usual. Admiral Herring urged people to call our local, state, and federal representatives. He said, Call those individuals who are in the federal system and can take the NRC to task and tell them this is not a regulatory issue, this is a safety issue. And the Constitution of the United States directs that this government provide for our safety, and they are not. Those were the words of Admiral Len Herring. We will have a video of Admiral Herring delivering his full speech up on the website, nuclearhotseat.com, under this episode, number 382, as well as a downloadable PDF of his full comments. Finally, I checked in with someone who wasn't at the Songs for Songs event, but always seems to have the most cutting edge and cutting information about San Onofre at her fingertips. Donna Gilmore of SanOnofreSafety.com has once again come up with a new piece of information, catching out the NRC on a really big oops that they would we rather not know. She and I spoke on Sunday, October 14, 2018.
To use one of the nuclear industry's favorite words, it seems that you have found a significant contradiction in what the NRC has been saying regarding the thin canisters. First of all, what has been their party line in terms of inspection of these canisters?
The NRC staff, they know that they cannot inspect these canisters, even the outside. They know they can crack. They know they can't be inspected for cracks. But in June of this year at the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, Daryl Dunn, a senior material engineer, told the board that they've got the inspection issue is covered, that they'll be able to inspect and repair these canisters. And that was totally misleading because they cannot do that. Tammy Thatcher, a member of the public, spoke up and questioned him that these canisters can crack and they can't be inspected. And he basically poo-pooed her and said that's false information being spread. These canisters can be inspected, they can be repaired. He says this in front of the board and is trying to discount the truth. This was in June of 2018 at the transportation meeting of the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board on the feasibility of transporting these basically cracking canisters. However, at the recent NRC commissioners meeting on October 11, 2018, another engineer at NRC admitted that they're still trying to figure out how they're going to be able to inspect the canisters for cracks and how they're even going to be able to characterize the cracks. And that means how long is the crack, what direction is it going. They do not, after years. We've had these canisters a little over 20 years now in service. Calvert Cliffs are up to 25 years old. They still haven't figured out how to inspect the surface for cracks or how deep cracks are. And once these cracks grow all the way through the wall of the canister, you can have an explosion on your hand. And each of these canisters is roughly a Chernobyl nuclear disaster, so this is not a minor issue.
How revolutionary or how game-changing might it be that we finally have someone from the NRC, a technical person, admitting that there's no way to inspect the cracks or characterize them if they do get identified?
We should be using this everywhere in legal filings and everything else. And now they're talking about transport, and they're actually approving containers for transport, even though they have no clue to know if the canisters are even intact. This is major and a major admission by the NRC.
Have they tried to step back from that, or is there any chance that this little piece of information from the meeting might disappear from official files?
Well, even if it does, I have so much evidence of NRC's own evidence that they cannot inspect for cracks. They don't know the size of cracks. So I have lots of information on my website about this. I was really upset when Daryl Dunn, who actually is the material engineer, I learned about the cracking problem from the canisters. He initially was very honest about this in technical meetings in 2014. Had conversations with him. He knows better. People are probably wondering, why can't they inspect them for cracks? Well, once you put highly radioactive, lethal spent nuclear fuel in these thin wall canisters, most are only a half-inch thick, you can't get close to them. And they're stored inside these thick concrete overpacks, and they're trying to find a way by going through the air vents in the concrete overpacks to inspect for cracks. There's no inspection technology that will work in that environment. Normally, the best way is to put a fluid dye inside and see where the dye runs. They can't do that once these things are filled with spent nuclear fuel. And the NRC initially approved these canisters for 20 years, and they excluded evaluating any corrosion issues that might occur after 20 years. They did not make sure that this container was inspectable when they approved it for 20 years. This is what's insane. And now they're getting over 20 years. What they approved for Calvert Cliffs, they have a license renewal. Calvert Cliffs, they're half-inch thick canisters. They renewed their license, and under inspection it says, well, use the best technology available at the time that can go through the air vents and find cracks. Well, guess what? There isn't any. But they're using the best available, which is basically nothing. Maybe a camera that can look at part of it that won't find cracks. But the NRC is not being real with the public, with the elected officials about this issue. It's really sad. Even NRC commissioners don't know about this problem. They are just getting a story from NRC management. I personally talked to at least 2 former and 1 current NRC commissioner, and they were totally not aware of this cracking issue, and these canisters weren't even designed to be inspected. And yet the NRC is claiming they'll be good for at least 100 years. But they don't put that right in terms of what they approve for a license. So this is obscene. So anytime the NRC says, oh, well, people have to follow the aging management plan, that's a bogus claim. So we're sitting here at San Onofre. Some of our canisters are 15 years old. We were able to get Edison to allow a couple of local people to actually take measurement inlet air vents of the older canisters. And the radiation levels coming out of those air vents of the oldest ones were over twice as high as all the others. It was over 2,000 counts per minute on the Geiger counter, where most of the others was under 1,000 counts. So we may already have leaking canisters at San Onofre, but they can't even inspect for cracks, let alone know if they're cracking all the way through. But these radiation levels are an indicator that something is wrong, and it could be through wall cracks. I reach out to the NRC, and they said they were going to check on it, and now I'm getting the typical BS letter that says everything's within nuclear regulatory regulations and, there's no problem. But they refuse to tell me why the levels are higher in those older canisters.
And, of course, those levels that they're talking about are simply arbitrary numbers that they have come up with to try and convince us that things are safe when perhaps they are not.
The NRC regulation talks about the allowable limit on the site. You know what the allowable limit on the site is by these canisters?
Mm-mm.
That's as low as reasonably achievable. That means anything is within NRC regulatory requirements for the on-site. So I asked the NRC managers, because she said, last time we were out checking, we didn't see any levels that were abnormal when we were out there inspecting at San Onofre. And I asked her, I said, well, what do you consider normal? She wouldn't tell me. She would not tell me what normal levels are. And her correspondence with me eventually just got forwarded up to Victor Drix, who's the chief PR person for the NRC that provides the cover stories. So this is obscene. I've contacted the state of California. I would like to see some leadership from Jerry Brown, but right now it's crickets with the state. They initially said they would look into this. I asked them to send their state radiologist to check it out, and they said they'd look into it, and now I hear nothing, and they don't even respond to my texts or emails or anything. So we may have a big cover-up going on here at San Onofre. And this should be a huge story.
And here's hoping that some reporters in mainstream media pick up this story and run with it. Donna Gilmore of SanOnofreSafety.com. Our thanks to the Samuel Lawrence Foundation for their support in putting Songs for Songs together. Activist shout-out. Congratulations to the 3 Mile Island Survivors Facebook group for breaking into print media with a well-written story in your local York daily record. You know, this is the pathway that was taken by the groups in North St. Louis, moving from Facebook into print media and then into the rest of the world. So all continued success to you. And there is a new group that has formed, genderandradiation.org. This is a site that's going to be focusing on the disproportionate impact of radiation on women and little girls. Mary Olson of NEARS is behind it, and I will be interviewing her for hopefully next week's show. And Space for Peace Week, which has just concluded, has yielded a video of an atomic blast in space, along with an explanation as to why that's different than a nuclear explosion on the ground. We'll have a link to it up on the website, nuclearhotseat.com, under this episode, number 382. No time for a final thought this week, so this has been Nuclear Hot Seat for Tuesday, October 16, 2018. Material for this week's show has been researched and compiled from nuclear-news.net, deunrenard.wordpress.com, miningawareness.wordpress.com, beyondnuclear.org, utilitydive.com, thenationalinterest.org, abqjournal.com, Sierra Club Grand Canyon Chapter, azdailysun.com, tri-cityherald.com, Nancy Faust and fukuleaks.org, Reuters.com, japantimes.co.jp, nhk.or.jp, mainichi.jp, dw.com, presenza.com, thiz.org, nuclearinformation.wordpress.com, the soul-dead cubicle drones who grind out press releases for world nuclear news instead of writing on their novel, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and special thanks to Scott Portsline of 3 Mile Island Alert for his help with the audio from the Songs for Songs event. Along with a big shout-out to Nuclear Hot Seat listeners and followers around the world, 123 countries on 6 continents and counting. And then there's everyone listening on the growing network of broadcast stations around the U.S. through the Pacifica Audioport Network. All of you show your love for life on this planet by being willing to know the hard nuclear truths and then taking action. I'm so glad I'm with you on this journey together as kick-ass defenders of nuclear truth and supporters of atomic awareness, if not atomic justice. If you'd like to get Nuclear Hot Seat delivered via email every week, it's easy. Go to nuclearhotseat.com, scroll down looking for the big yellow box, especially if you're on a tablet or a smartphone, it may take a while. And that's where you sign up with your first name and email address for an email link to the latest show. I promise you I won't bug you with marketing. If you appreciate weekly verifiable news updates about nuclear issues around the world as well as your own backyard, take a moment to send a donation of any size to nuclearhotseat.com, and we will really appreciate and be grateful for your support. Nuclear Hot Seat is copyright 2018, Libby, Halevi, and Hardestry Communications. All rights reserved, but fair use allowed as long as proper attribution is provided. This is Libby Halevi of Hardestry Communications, the heart of the art of communicating, reminding you that the last thing that anyone who opposes nuclear wants to be able to say is, "I told you so." There you've got it, your nuclear wake-up call for the week. So don't go back to sleep, because we are all in the nuclear hot seat.
Nuclear hot seat. What are those people thinking? Nuclear hot seat. What have those boys been drinking? Nuclear hot seat. The corium is sinking. Our time to act is shrinking, but our activists are linking. Nuclear hot seat. It's the bomb.